So, your season is coming to an end, and you need a way to decide a winner. You could let the season itself determine the champion, but this is America, which means that for some reason, that sort of thing is for nerds, and we absolutely have to have a playoff.
Playoffs?
Every single major American sports league, as well as most of the less major ones and the collegiate ones, has some kind of playoff tournament. The formats between them vary. The NFL has a single elimination tournament, while the NBA plays a 16-team bracket of 7-game series. And baseball, well, baseball is just kind of complicated now. But they all have them, and the undisputed king of all playoff tournaments in the US is March Madness. The games are scheduled in such a way that as soon as one of them ends, there's another dopamine hit waiting for you when the broadcast switches over to the next one. Probably not the best for your blood pressure, but for those few weeks, it is an absolutely electrifying experience. And that's the point. More so than even finding the actual best team in the country, which in a lot of cases, it probably doesn't. As much as we love playoffs here in the States, none of them are really designed to actually be representative of an entire season. And that idea haunts me. My kind of morbid fascination with this actually comes from the last chapter of Moneyball. One of the big criticisms of the A's from that era was that they never really did anything in the playoffs, but if the purpose of the playoffs, at least ostensibly, is to determine the champion of the league, then, as Michael Lewis points out, the math on that is pretty backwards. From 2001 to 2003, the A's had a 3-year stretch where they averaged 100 wins per season, and had it not been for the Mariners going absolutely nuclear in 2001, they would have won 3 straight division titles. Over a nearly 500-game sample size, this team was absolutely spectacular, and yet, because they couldn't replicate that in the 11 games that mattered, history remembers them very differently. I guess my question is this. What is the point of all these playoff tournaments? Practically, it's to find a winner, but if you've been a sports fan for any kind of time, you know that line of thinking has some serious flaws. And then there's the slightly more cynical but no less correct answer. Playoffs are exciting, and people will pay money to watch exciting things. But while those are both probably accurate ways of describing things, neither one is particularly satisfying. In an ideal world, we could find a way to balance the fairness of the regular season with the excitement of the postseason. And I think there's at least one tournament that does a pretty good job of that. But the decisions on how these things end up being constructed don't get made by accident. And while the theory on how that process actually works can get pretty convoluted, it's worth taking a few minutes to try and unpack. To help with that, I reached out to Dr. Phil Plasek, the Director of Data Science at City Builder in Seattle, Washington, and a man who knows a thing or two about how tournaments work. Phil is a former professional gamer and chess player, and has spent a lot of time contemplating and discussing how tournaments work from that perspective, both in formal research settings and slightly less formal ones.
That was just, late night, drunken conversation that we had, and the next morning I woke up and I was like, okay, someone out there has surely figured out the problem, the problem being like, what is a good tournament format and, what defines good? And so I kind of just went to the literature, I asked Google and I asked Google Scholar for the answers to these questions, and nobody knew. And it wasn't that nobody knew, no one had even really tried.
What resulted from that initial curiosity was this: a paper discussing all of the mathematical and social influences that contribute to a tournament being good or bad, the main gist of which being, spoiler alert, that the perfect tournament doesn't exist. So, sorry if you clicked on this video thinking that was where this was headed. But almost regardless of the conclusion he ended up coming to, Phil's process of getting there felt like something worth highlighting.
So part of my job as a psychology professor is trying to sort of get my students and people on YouTube to think scientifically and go from a question that they can have drunkenly with their friends one night and actually turn that into an empirical analysis. And so actually, something you could share at a conference, right? And there is various steps that go between those two places. So where do you start?
It basically starts by seeing if someone else has asked this question and have attempted to find an answer. So in this case, just go to Google and Google Scholar and ask what you're thinking about and see what comes up to that, and see if anyone kind of came up with the solutions that you're kind of looking for in that direction.
Cards on the table here, that is exactly how I find most of the smart people that appear on this channel, including Phil. I'd like to think that I'm pretty knowledgeable about some things scientifically, but not all of the things. And in this case, Phil's paper looked at questions like what the point of a tournament is, or what fairness means in the context of a tournament, or the limitations of some of the research that's already been done on tournaments up to this point. But his main conclusion, and the one that we're most concerned with, is right there in the title.
You did land on the idea that there is no perfect tournament.
Yeah.
And so, why, I guess, is the question I would have.
Okay, so it's very easy to explain colloquially. There's always going to be a player in your tournament that has a legitimate and logical reason to complain about the format. And that usually comes in one of two ways. It's either, I would have made it farther if I had got to play a different player, or there's another player in the tournament who I'm better than, but they made it farther than me. There's always going to be someone in your tournament that has a logical reason to complain about it.
You know who had a logical reason to complain about the postseason format? The 2001 A's. They won 102 games that season, but had to play the defending champion Yankees in the division series because they were a wild card team. But you know who had even more of a reason to be annoyed? The Mariners. They won that same division by 14 games, posting the best record in modern baseball history, only to lose to that same Yankees team in the ALCS. Sports history is riddled with examples, from the 2015 Warriors to the 2015 Carolina Panthers, who have categorically dominant regular seasons, only to end up without a crowning achievement to show for it. And the NCAA Tournament, for all its merits, is no different. All of the teams that beat those teams were really good, but does that mean that the end result was right? Was that fair, according to Phil's definition of tournament fairness? Maybe, maybe not, but in either case, there's another thing that he addresses in his analysis that a lot of people miss in this kind of discussion.
The first part of my paper is kind of going through this logical notion that a tournament is a game, separate in and of itself from whatever game the tournament is about. And I would say that's like one of the most important things you could take away and just remember for your daily life, is that a tournament is a game by itself, separate from whatever other game you're playing. What I would say is decide what's important to you and then build your tournament around that.
That last part is absolutely crucial in understanding the effectiveness of a tournament, and why I think March Madness is just about the closest thing we've got to a perfect setup. Because the NCAA decided a long time ago that this, the frenetic single elimination format that we've all come to know and love, was what they wanted their postseason tournament to embody. And on that point, they are pretty much crushing it.
Single elimination tournaments are really fun to watch, and that is probably because every game matters. And I think March Madness did a very good thing by, building the bracket of like you fill out your own bracket kind of thing, and understanding that, no one's going to get it perfectly because of combinatorial explosion. So yeah, single elimination tournament is very fun to watch, very easy to hype up in that matter.
As exciting as it is, though, the design of the NCAA tournament does have a few weak points. If the best team in the tournament has a bad night, that's just kind of it. There's also the statistically supported idea that if you want to go far in the tournament, it's way, way better to be an 11 or 12 seed than it is an 8 or 9. All of which will be determined by a subjective group of committee members who decide both who gets in and who goes where. Some teams will get in automatically, which is good for the sake of objectivity, but qualification for conference winners means that there will be teams in the tournament who are much worse than the top teams. From a tournament construction perspective, these are all ways that March Madness can be less fair or competitively balanced, but it's worth putting those weaknesses into context by comparing them with those of other sports. Take the World Cup, for instance. Not only do World Cup groups get determined by the FIFA rankings, which are notoriously weird and hard to understand, but the setup of the tournament allows for what I'm just going to refer to broadly as shenanigans. For instance, if you reach the last game of the group stage and both teams know that a draw or even a loss gets them both to the next round, where's the incentive to try and win? This is exactly what happened in 1982 between West Germany and Austria. When the Germans scored 10 minutes into the game, both teams had what they needed to get through, so there was no real reason to keep playing. But that's nothing compared to what happened in the women's Olympic badminton competition in 2012. To try and get a more favorable quarterfinal matchup, 4 of the top teams in the competition started trying to lose on purpose, and in a pretty outstanding moment of irony, were immediately disqualified. The NCAA tournament may not be perfect, but every game in it legitimately matters a lot. Not only does that effectively eliminate the possibility of shenanigans, but it also gets rid of any potential meaningless, non-competitive blowouts that might happen in a series, where there'll be more games later. There might be ways to make it more fair or balanced, but a lot of them aren't really feasible. Take, for instance, reseeding the tournament after every round to ensure the top seeds are playing the lowest ones. It makes sense, right? Well, sure, in a vacuum, but if you're a 14 seed that wins your opening round game in Boise, does it really make sense to travel all the way to Buffalo to play in the next one? that's going to cost everyone millions of dollars and probably put a limit on which teams are going to be able to participate at all. And any major alteration to the format is going to require changes like that. And while the current system is definitely chaotic, it's also the most representative of the sport that it's trying to showcase.
This giant single elimination bracket is inclusive. A lot of teams get to play in it, right? So it's more inclusive, and there's a lot of teams being played, right? Instead of you just, taking, the top 16 and having them play best of threes against each other. That could be a different tournament that would work and would probably get you the best team more closely to win, but it'd be a little less inclusive. There'd be less conferences in there and less, conference spirit.
Yeah, and for the collegiate national basketball championship, it has a very collegiate atmosphere. You bring and then giving them a chance to perform. That's pretty neat. I'm on.
Right.
To me, for what it's trying to be, the NCAA tournament is essentially perfect. March Madness is exactly the product that the NCAA wants. They don't see the pandemonium as a bug. They see it as a feature. And in the end, they kind of get to have their cake and eat it too. They get all the intrigue and excitement from the first couple of rounds, but by the end of it, the cream still usually rises to the top. And to me, that makes it pretty unique. In the end, my discussion with Phil brought me a couple of key insights into tournaments. First of all, what we usually refer to as regular seasons are themselves just long, round-robin style tournaments. Soccer figured this out a long time ago, but in an ideal world, we would have every single team play every other team under the same conditions as many times as possible, figure out a winner, and then call it a day. Teams like the 2001 Mariners would probably prefer that way of determining a champion. But secondly, like Phil mentioned earlier, tournaments are games in and of themselves. Certain teams or players are more comfortable in certain tournament settings because each one requires a different set of attributes to have success in. Think about teams like Eli Manning's Giants or the 2010s baseball Giants for that matter. Neither were dominant at any point in the regular season, and yet, within the parameters of the postseason tournament, they were absolutely spectacular. Personally, I have some issues with deciding the winner of one tournament with the winner of another, but putting those aside for a second, whatever style of tournament you choose to go with, you need to make sure that it measures the characteristics that you think are most important for your sport. College basketball decided a long time ago that it wanted to choose its champion through a 3-week-long cross-country gauntlet that pushes its athletes and coaches to their physical and emotional limit in every single round. It's not the most precise way of doing things, and believe me, it does hurt if your team has an amazing season only to lose in the earlier rounds, but this tournament is built to be brutal. It's designed to test the resolve of both its participants and those watching it, and the team that can handle that the best usually comes out the winner. It's anarchy, so much so that it's quite literally impossible to predict, but that's part of the appeal. It's deliberately imperfect, and paradoxically, that might make it the most perfect tournament that we have. Hi everyone, my name is Will, and this is my channel, Student of the Game, where we talk about anything and everything related to sports psychology and culture. A lot is going to be said and written over the next few weeks about March Madness, but I wanted to do something a little different that you might not have thought about, or at least I hadn't. And as always, I had to cut a bunch of really smart and interesting things that Phil said, like why you can't predict the results of a 64-team tournament due to something called combinatorial explosion. But if you want to see that whole interview, you can sign up for the Patreon at the link below. If you enjoyed the video, give it a like and subscribe to the channel for more stuff like it. But for this video, that's pretty much it. Happy March Madness, and I'll talk to y'all soon. Bye.